What do you think about the state of the economy in Portugal at the moment?
The state of the economy, as you know, we've just recently had a bailout from the IMF and the European Central Bank and Commission, and we're waiting for it to get implemented. We see the economy as suffering a little bit, but we think that the measures that were put in place could guide Portugal to a better scenario in the future.
As part of the EU-IMF bailout, Portugal agreed to carry out reforms and meet new fiscal targets. Are you optimistic that the government that will be in office after the election on June 5th will be able to meet all those commitments and deadlines?
Well, I think all the main parties that can form a government have subscribed to the bailout. So I don't see there's any question in the mind of the politicians that the memorandum of understanding is to be fulfilled in its integrity. So I don't see any issues there.
Sure, but how difficult do you think it's going to be when the economy is already suffering and will now have to implement additional austerity measures, spending cuts, public sector worker cuts in order to access the international aid?
It's not a question of trying to do it. We have to do it. I think that Portuguese, once they get their heads to it, they will subscribe to it. And we'll just have to fix the fiscal imbalances that the country has, so then the country can be better prepared for growth in the future.
The Portuguese government forecasts that GDP will contract 2% both this year and next year in 2012. How concerned are you about the effect this will have on the domestic economy?
Obviously, for the overall economy, those numbers are not good news. We would prefer to see the economy start picking up as of next year. Unfortunately, with these measures, it will be tough. Nonetheless, I think we have to, as I mentioned, to fix the fiscal imbalances and then create the conditions for Portugal to grow in the future.
What about those austerity measures, the increase in some taxes, cutting investment in some areas? How is all of this affecting EDP, particularly in terms of power demand and distribution?
Well, we're not, obviously we're slightly affected because there's going to be less demand with GDP falling, but Portugal is part of an Iberian market, so where Spain is 5 or 6 times at least bigger than Portugal. So the overall market, in as long as Spain maintains small growth, it's not going to be overly impacted by electricity consumption. Nonetheless, it's an issue, but since you're a very regulated company, the returns should be fairly much the same regardless of the demand.
How soon do you think the Portuguese government might sell its holding in EDP? Are you involved at all in helping to find investors that may buy that holding?
Yes, the memorandum states that Portugal should sell the entire stake by the end of this year. We have recommended to the government, and there's been talks already existed between the government and 2 parties that would like to buy a strategic stake with us. What we've been trying to build is a core shareholder group of companies and which give us technological hedges or geographical hedges. If we can do so and help the government sell its stake, I think will be good for EDP in the future.
So you anticipate that that will be completed this year, at the end of this year?
I would say that the majority of it, for sure, this way, with 1 or 2 parties, can be done this year. The rest remains for the new government that will come out of the elections to decide how it's going to carry it out.
And if I could ask you about EDP's plans to sell the shares of its Brazilian unit now, how much do you expect to raise from selling shares in EDP Brazil, and when might that transaction be completed?
Well, we filed with the stock exchange or the regulators last week in São Paulo. We expect the transaction to be carried out by the beginning of July. That's the best timetable I can give you right now. At current prices, would raise somewhere in the neighborhood of 350 million euros for EDP. Nonetheless, I would like to
Sorry, please continue.
I was just trying to say, EDP, however, will maintain control of the Brazilian business, and we continue to be fully committed to the growth of the business in Brazil.
So then, just to clarify this, do you plan to sell any more assets to meet that aim of raising 500 million euros in asset sales this year? Or do you in fact expect the sale of EDP Brazil alone will be enough to meet that target?
No, we hope to go over the 500 million disposals we talked about. We would expect to sell minority stakes in wind farms. We have currently a couple of processes underway, and I would expect them either just before the summer or after the summer to conclude those. So, and those two parks alone would put the figure above the 500 million.